Self-portraiture has had a checkered history. It's gone in and out of fashion over hundreds of years, but its importance cannot be underestimated. A self-portrait shows us the way the artist sees themselves. It's a form of interrogation, it's a place for experimentation. Now, the House of Manannan on the Isle of Man is a treasure trove of artefacts and stories, and it's about to play host to an important exhibition of self-portraits. But these self-portraits don't just tell us about the artist who created them, they tell us about their collector, a German Jewish refugee who had a short but incredible history with the island. This is the story of the Ruth Borchard Collection. I've curated loads of exhibitions and they can come about in any number of ways. When I heard about the background to this exhibition, I thought it was pretty special. It makes it really unique. I'm here in London to meet a fellow art lover who discovered this really incredible story and recognised the significance of this collection to the history of British art. So, Robert, you must tell me, how did you discover the Ruth Borchard Collection?
It began with her son, Richard Borshod. He's a client of the gallery, and Richard came in one day and said the family had a dilemma. Their mother, Ruth, who was 90 at the time, had amassed a collection of British self-portraits, 100 works, and the family were uncertain what they should do with it. And I went up and was just bowled away by this group of self-portraits.
I mean, you must have so many people come to the gallery and say, I have an opportunity for you, and it's usually a bit of a waste of time. When this walks in, it's a gift. I mean, it's such a great story.
Absolutely. Interestingly, you know, since we've been involved in, particularly in this subject, how it's changed. I mean, the world has really woken up to the value of self-portraits, where now, as a genre, they're highly prized and they actually often have added value.
Do you think in a way that Ruth Borchard was a sort of an innovator, quite ahead of her time, and being interested in something that was, you know, very introspective, the artist really kind of looking at themselves? It was like, and also a place where artists can be quite experimental.
I think it was partly because there was an academic side to Ruth, and she was very interested in autobiographies. And in a sense, self-portraiture is as close as you get to autobiography in paint.
I completely agree.
And they're very self-revelatory. And it's funny how artists can be very brave when they come to tackle self-portraits.
Let's look at some. They're all here in storage. They're all asleep in their beds. We need to pull them out and have a look at a few. I love it when you get things out of storage. Art needs an audience, it needs to be seen. And this is by Peter Phillips, and I think he painted this when he was just a wee 19 years old.
Oh, look at that. You know, a man that goes on to establish himself as a pop artist, and here we are. What is it? Is it a painting of a still life on a check tablecloth? He is in the background, obviously reflected in a little oval mirror.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because Ruth said that it was a collection of British artists, but of course a lot of them were emigres as well and had come from other places, also probably escaping the war, and had made London their home. And so it wasn't about British artists, it was about people that were based in Britain. Where do you think that came from?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the case. I think it's partly, remember, she was an emigre. You know, like so many who've come to the UK at different times in history, and she came, of course, in the late 30s, escaping Nazi Germany, and she brought her aesthetic with her.
So Ruth's this amazing, independently minded woman, and yet in her collection of 100, she only collected 5. And actually Jean Cook calls her out on this in a letter that she sends to her. She says, I'm no feminist, but why have you only got 5 women in the collection? What was it about?
I think it was simply that there weren't that many women professionally painting at that time. It's as simple as that. And Jean picked her up on that, rightly so. And I think as a result of that, she acquired this amazing self-portrait of Jean very early on in her life.
I just love this painting. I love the intensity of it. And it says to me so much about the Ruth Borchard collection. It's a painting which is deeply introspective. And also I love the kind of drab post-war British quality to it. It's a bit sort of kitchen sink, the chintzy curtains, yes. All a bit kind of these gorgeous sort of sickert-like grey tones. I mean, it is about the kind of whole history of British painting here.
That's what I really pick up on this. And as you say, Sickert, probably the most influential British artist of the 20th century, you can see it in this Jean Cook painting.
I think one of the strengths of the collection is that actually Ruth Borchard wasn't sort of over-intellectualising it. She didn't wait for an artist to get super famous. She didn't even read art reviews. She was very much on her own organic journey, like following her gut instinct to find these artists and to sort of champion them in this way.
What I find so interesting about the collection, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, Kate, is that so many collectors today are influenced by their advisors, by what's going on in the media, by so many different factors. And you sometimes see that in the collection. It doesn't have a continuity to it. Ruth Borchard had none of that. It was her simple choice, no one else was influencing it. And I think the collection is all the stronger because of that. And she had a hit list and she wrote them up in this little book and she would go through it and very systematically approach the artist.
So you've got it with all her notes?
I've got it, yeah.
I'm dying to see that. Let's have a look. I'm really hoping some of her sort of collecting mastery rubs off. She gets people turning her down. Lucy and Freud. This is good stuff.
And in the archive box, we've got a number of the correspondence that developed from her approaches through the Little Black Book. And interestingly, we've got ones that were successful and we've equally got ones that weren't successful. Henry Moore, very sweet letter saying he hoped her book will prove a great success and her collection a great success, but he hadn't got a self-portrait at that stage.
I mean, that's the thing as well, because she's asking someone like Henry Moore, who's not a self-portraitist, he's not someone who would sort of sit and make work of that kind, but I think she's just so interested in who they are as artists that she would like them to have a self-portrait. That's fascinating to me.
She was prepared to cut across any kind of divides and just go straight to them. And as a result, generally had a very warm response. John Nash, I mean, lots of fascinating people, Victor Passmore, etc.
I am really just trying to suck all this up. I think it's so fascinating. She is so inspirational to me, seriously. Robert has such an affinity for these pictures. I'm so pleased that Ruth's family found someone that not only immediately recognised the significance of the collection, but actually saw Ruth's accomplishment. I'm on my way to meet Ruth's son Richard and her granddaughter, who's also called Ruth. I can't wait to find out more about this incredible person. I think I can learn a lot from her. Richard and Ruth, I am so taken with Ruth Borchard. I think she's the most fascinating, interesting woman with such a great eye. What does it feel like to see this amazing collection that she pulled together?
I've always been very proud of my mother and father. When she asked me shortly before she died, pointed to the collection and says, look after that, do something with it. And so that for the last 20 years or so, this is really what we've done as a memorial for my mother, for the family. She used to take me around the Young Contemporaries exhibition and I'd say, I'd like this one. No, you have to feel it. Don't use your eyes.
Yeah, talk to me about this feeling business. I mean, and this idea of dowsing for
It's
art.
like putting your conscious mind out and your critical one, and it's relaxing back into what you actually feel.
Always she had a pendulum, and she'd use it all the time for, what shall I eat?
Really?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so this dowsing is a huge part of her life and her sort of attitude to living.
No, absolutely.
And so what happens when she arrives in the UK after leaving Hamburg?
That was a very sudden and necessary departure. 1938 they had to leave as refugees to come here.
But then your grandmother's interned on the Isle of Man,
yes.
And they were in separate camps.
Yes.
So my grandmother refused to leave her child, which was my mother, Catherine, so she took her with her. She was the only child in the internment camps.
Wow.
And my grandmother hung this sign around my mother's neck because she was, one toddling around saying, do not feed, do not cuddle. because she was getting so fat because everyone was feeding her all the time,
Oh,
and
well,
all the parents
of course, so
didn't
desperate to see their own children.
Yeah,
oh my
so
God.
that-
As someone who's got a baby about that age, it makes me really well up the thought of the idea of even being separated from your child at that stage.
Yeah, it was a tough time. It was a
Yeah.
really tough time, and my grandparents were allowed to meet, I think, about once a month. They met from the male camp and the female camp. They came together,
Right.
and my mother said to my grandmother, "Who's that man? Who is he?" Because she didn't know, they weren't living together.
Oh, no, it's so sad. So when does she start really sort of taking this collecting seriously?
The idea came to her when it was the late 50s, and shipping had been doing quite well, and my father was buying her a painting for 2,000 guineas.
Blimey.
And she said, no, that's a waste of money. For 2,000 guineas, I will invite 100 artists painting in Britain today to paint their self-portrait, just like the Medici did in Florence in 14-something, when he asked 60 painters to do their self-portrait one year.
Wow, okay, so she had, from the very beginning, she had great aspirations.
Grandiose, I wouldn't say
Yeah.
grandiose, but a very clear idea. What she wanted to do and what the collection was going to be was totally clear from the beginning.
So you've got all these lovely old photographs, and I believe as well that your mother was painted by one of the artists that she'd acquired work from. Do you think this is an accurate representation of who she was as a person?
She certainly grew into it.
Right.
When it first arrived, when was this, 58, we said, oh, that's not Mum. She looks 10 years older.
That's often the way with portraits, isn't it? Yeah.
But she became to look exactly like that.
And so what do you think overall her attitude was to art? What do you think this self-portrait collection was all about?
It just was looking at the person, the artists, and looking into their soul, and at the person who had done great work which she admired. But this was, her interest in the art was the artist.
Speaking to Ruth and Richard, you realise that Ruth Borchard was not just a genuine art lover, she was a complex kind of collector. The whole idea for this project came about in a time in her life when things were slipping away from her. She was seeking introspection in painting. It's almost as if this collection is a kind of salvation. After the break, we'll hear from an artist that Ruth placed in her collection, and I'll meet a younger painter who Ruth may not have known personally, but who is an important part of her legacy.
I'm looking at my painting now. I haven't seen it after in 1964 to now. Promising young man, possibly, I don't know. It sort of delivers, which I find it difficult to do nowadays, especially to finish a picture like that. Obviously finish at the right time. One touch more and would have ruined it. Ruth Borchard, as far as I remember, was about 1964. We met in a gallery and she said, would you subscribe? And I said, yes, please. And so there wasn't any, it was a great privilege. And I didn't know, of course, that every painter who's ever been, she got into her net. So, right, that was an order, wasn't it? I had to do it. So I went upstairs and looked at myself in the mirror in front of the window and started to work. It's a magnificent record of young people, mostly, at that time. I think I was less self-conscious then, more naive, more simple, whereas now I've got probably a lot of baggage, Titian and all that, Cézanne and thoughts and what one aims for now. But then I did what I could then. So that, I like its simplicity. It comes from the soul, as it were.
We all know life couldn't be more different at the moment. When we started this film in summer 2020, we really hoped we'd get to see the Ruth Borchard exhibition on the Isle of Man. Sadly, visitors are still not permitted, but art always finds a way, and the paintings are happily installed at the venue. So although I won't get to see them in person, I'm pleased to say that I'm going to get to speak to one of the team on the island. Hello Yvonne, I'm so sorry I can't be there, but I'm really pleased I'm going to get to speak to you. Tell me a bit about what you do at the museum.
Well, I'm one of the curators of social history, so I deal with the social history collections, fine art and textiles as well. They're Manx-based collections, so everything that I'm dealing with is in some way related to the Isle of Man.
So tell me more about this period in the Isle of Man's history when there were people interned there. How many people were there, do we think?
Probably sort of 17 or more thousand enemy aliens were interned on the Isle of Man. For the male internees, they were put into boarding houses. For the women and children, it is a completely different experience. Instead of being put into empty boarding houses, the women and children are billeted with local boarding house keepers and hoteliers, and a whole section of the southern part of the Isle of Man is put behind barbed wire to create the Russian internment camp, after the name of the parish of Russian.
And so that's what Ruth Borchard was part of with her daughter.
Yes. It's interesting that in Russian camp, that's when Ruth Borchard starts the service exchange, and that becomes such an important part of the camp. It becomes this sort of economic model where people can exchange the skills they have for the skills they want.
Yeah, so she's a fantastically intelligent woman. She finds herself, she's still young, she's there on the Isle of Man. I mean, what does it mean to you to be able to see what she went on to achieve? I mean, the collection is so singular, it's so interesting, and to get it there on the Isle of Man, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's fascinating, both looking at the collection that she developed, and it's such an amazing cross-section. And in a way, it's reflecting what she will have seen in the Russian internment camp, this cross-section of people and individuals. And you have this one concept of the self-portrait, and in internment you have apparently this overarching concept of internment. But actually, once you get to the individual level, everybody has their own experience. So with the portraits, every artist is portraying themselves in a very different way, and I think it's fascinating to see that whole spectrum. But to be able to have the collection on the Isle of Man, basically on the 80th anniversary of both the opening of the internment camps, but then also the service exchange started in September 1940. So 80 years later, her collection and her vision of a post-war Britain comes back to the island.
I'm really impressed by the first painting that Ruth Borchard collected. It was by Raymond Coxon, and he painted it when he'd just come out of World War I, and I feel like you can see the horrors of war on his face. He's smoking this pipe, there's an intensity to it, there's this lovely sort of pink flesh coming out of all these grey tones. I think it's a painting from 1921 working out what art should be after the war, and obviously that had a very special resonance for Ruth Borchard herself. I also really love Ethel Colquhoun's self-portrait. She made it when she was still at the Slade School and then sent it to Ruth Borchard. So I like the fact that she backed herself, she was still a student. I also like the correspondence between the two women. Ethel was an occultist, so there's all this talk of spirituality as well as the place of women in the art world. And I think the painting has a particular kind of surrealist potency to it. You can see this big kind of gushing waterfall in the background. Ethel's making a bit of a statement by putting herself beside this sort of strong natural force. What's especially lovely about Ruth's legacy is that it doesn't end with the final painting she acquired. Thanks to Robert at the gallery and her family, there's a whole new generation of artists being supported in Ruth Borchard's name. There's a wonderful legacy for Ruth Borchard. It is the Ruth Borchard Self-Portrait Prize. It happens every 2 years. And Benjamin Obebo, you won in 2017. How does it feel?
Well, it's a great honor to win the prize, and really excited.
And here's the painting.
Yes.
I mean, I can tell immediately that Ruth Borchard would have loved this because there's a very direct quality to it, but at the same time it feels introspective.
Yeah.
Actually, it's like a little bit of a Renaissance jewel. Tell me about the way that you work.
That's what my aim was, and to achieve that Renaissance Baroque kind of style to it, to create something with an old medium, to produce something that's, modern today.
You completely achieved it. And it absolutely embraces the possibilities and the challenges that self-portraiture presents.
Yes.
How long did it take you to paint this?
This took me about 4 months to do. Because they've been a lot quicker, well, on and off, because of the process as well. I like to use a wet and wet technique where required, and then allow some parts to dry, then go on and put another layer on. So anytime.
Decent drying
Exactly.
time. When you make a self-portrait, are you conscious of the fact that you're slightly revealing something of yourself personally? Do you feel a bit like, oh, I'm on display?
Yes, it's something you think about when creating the portrait, because there you are. You're using your craftsmanship to create a work that represents you, and that will encapsulate things like your identity, your background, and your emotions, and you tell your story. And the story could be retrospective or in the moment, or your visions for the future.
And do you make many self-portraits? Is this something that you've come back to? Are you a Rembrandt, making one every year?
I know, but Rembrandt's an inspiration as well. So, and many other artists out there have been an inspiration for self-portraits. But I only have 2 at the moment, this one and the previous one before this. But in between and after this one, there's been lots of painting going on of other people. So that also helps me as well in developing my craftsmanship and making portraits.
And so what does winning the prize mean to you?
Well, it means a lot. It means my work's been recognized in the first place, and there's encouragement there to produce more work as well and make more self-portraits in the future, and then to inspire other people as well.
This exhibition is such a fitting tribute to Ruth Borchard. The fact that it is happening in this particular moment feels prescient, but it's a really uplifting story. Ruth Borchard and her contemporaries must have been completely bewildered, trapped in a world they barely recognised. But arts and culture were a life raft then, as they are now. Even separated by time and geography, spending time with the Ruth Borchard story has taught me so much.